to everyone who's currently listening or watching us. I hope you have been enjoying this series of talks so far and that you have met new people virtually. Not far from our virtual presence today, my talk is about appreciating new virtual contacts. But instead of people, I look at things. Some of them are relatively smart. Think about a connected decision-making system, while many others are simple and perhaps too small, I would say. Think about individual sensors or actuators. In the past, forensic readiness meant that you have a traditional plan as part of a business, a team, and a toolkit for them to investigate a digital crime scene. This is usually guided by a digital investigation model. Nowadays, however, with the complexities and widespread of digital systems, a traditional approach will not work. Think about efficiency, think about cost, and deadlines to reach conclusions about an incident. So, hello again, my name is Haider, Dr. Haider al-Khateeb, and today I'm going to talk about forensic readiness, leveraging a new concept, digital witnesses in the supply chain. Moving forward, just to give you, and try to keep it simple, to give you an overview about today's session, I will share a bit about what I do to introduce myself, then pretty much introducing the topic, especially cyber events, digital crime scene, models and standards related to the digital crime scene that I keep referring to. What we have nowadays in terms of connected supply chain, examples for cyber attacks involving the supply chain, the Internet of Things, which is being integrated everywhere we go, especially in businesses, for clear benefits that they offer. And then we look at vulnerabilities, including at least one slide on the human vulnerability as part of the supply chain itself. That will help us to set an aim. What do we look for usually? And the answer is we look for cyber resilient, for a cyber resilient infrastructure. So cyber resilience is the aim. And that will pretty much set the foundation to justify why we need to introduce digital witnesses. And also what enabling technologies do we have for this to be a reality and contribute to making our supply chain more secure. I will also be keen to share at least an example from a recent project we have been involved in and published. A bit more about myself. I hold a position as a lead in cybersecurity. I look after the Wolverhampton Cyber Research Institute as a deputy director at the University of Wolverhampton, and Cyber Quarter. This is the Herford Center for Cybersecurity, which is quite newly established now with very promising plans. My role includes leading research and development projects, consultancy, and knowledge exchange. I'm also a senior fellow of Higher Education Academy, so I do pretty much enjoy teaching and I enjoy talking to the community. I look after our MSc in cybersecurity. When it comes to research areas, I spend a lot of time on topics such as distributed digital forensics, cyber resilience, cyber threat intelligence, but also online safety for vulnerable groups, and this is more multidisciplinary. This is an opportunity where we also work with people from psychology, from public health. And I want to mention this precisely because the world we live in nowadays, it takes more than a technical approach to solve a problem. The cyber is complex and we need a multidisciplinary approach. Moving forward, focusing on what it means to have a cyber event happening. A cyber event refers to incidents, and those incidents ranges from computer malfunction, defaced websites, to maybe exceptionally disruptive denial of service attacks, including ransomware. And we have seen their impact on the health industry multiple times in the very recent past, I would say. And they continue to do so. In addition to that, the National Center for Cybersecurity in the UK, they have included accidental incidents as part of this. So things such as damage from fire or flood, they are part of the definition of an incident. And when we address incidents, we cover those as well as part of our planning because they affect and they have impact on business continuity. We use incident response as a process, therefore, in businesses to manage disruptive cyber events. It includes several incident handling techniques and phases to help businesses to detect, analyze, contain, eradicate, and finally recover from various types of cyber events. Clearly, in what I'm mentioning here, I'm referring to a methodology for incident response, as you can see here on the slides. And these four boxes represents the key phases, or at least an example of them. They can be slightly different between companies when they develop their own work or their own plan. Looking or moving more to specialize within incident response, we hit digital forensics. It's a methodology, but it is part of how we respond to incidents. What I can say about this is that cyber events and incidents, they leave traces. They leave information stored or transmitted in binary for us to analyze and to understand what actually happened. And that will help us to fix problems or to at least develop better response to prevent them from happening in the future. We refer to that as digital evidence. And if addressed properly, it can be relied upon in a court of law. If I would like to share a definition then for what a digital evidence is, I would say then it is any data that takes this form and it is shared in binary. And when we look at it, we usually try to identify and collect it. Then we store it for analysis before we reach conclusions. To have value from this digital evidence, we need to follow something called chain of custody. And that is all the documentation required, usually of significant importance for law enforcement. But businesses, they likewise need to be very careful when they implement digital investigation, because it might be how they prevent incidents. There might be internal parties that they want to report to a court of law. It might be how they convince law enforcement that there is a real break of legislation, or if for them to simply trust information as part of their cyber threat intelligence. So all that shows the value for a trusted digital evidence, really. However, the digital evidence is intangible due to its non-material and volatile nature hosted within digital devices. It's simply intangible. Therefore, we need extensive, well-governed procedures for the collection and analysis of digital evidence. To share some examples here, and I'm sharing with you a screenshot I selectively took from one of the recent projects we have done in this regard. But first, let me just say that digital investigation models have been introduced. They help us to answer questions such as who's responsible for storing the digital evidence. Many have been based on a model from 2004. It was produced or introduced to us by the Digital Forensic Research Workshop. And different models came because we have bespoke requirements from businesses and from different law enforcement. In fact, I believe that one of the themes for the coming Forensic Europe is a discussion around collaboration and collaborative forensic models. This came through and it was something they picked up from the reference I'm sharing with you here. And it shows that these models, they are still being discussed, and we need to cope with challenges introduced by technology. It was then, now if you look at this model from the name, it's a collaborative digital forensic and incident response, and that keyword is important not only to facilitate how information is going to flow between different individuals as part of the investigation team, but actually it's about different parties. They can be different stakeholders, companies, organizations. Think about a cross-border agencies as well when they try to work together to fight cybercrime. When it comes to standards, we look at a couple of ISO standards to mention examples that support this process. We look at the 17025, which looks after digital forensics laboratories in the United Kingdom. This standard became mandatory since October 2017. And this is the place where we analyze digital evidence. So the point is we have regulations and we have different modules to move forward to eliminate the problem that comes from the cyberspace. Not to forget that in countries we have principles that we need to adhere to. I mean, in the US, they refer to the Secret Service. Interestingly, they are the ones to share golden rules about digital forensics. In the UK, we still refer to the ACPO principles. There are 4. And they came from the older ACPO, as in the Association of Chief Police Officers of England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Since then, they were replaced by the National Police Chief Council, NPCC. But in all cases, ACPO guide principles, they are still being highly referenced and quite moving forward beyond the timeline because they are generic and they are important. They remained. These principles, they, for instance, refer to that when you investigate, no action should take place by the investigator where you change evidence, because from forensic science, an evidence is not admissible anymore if you change it. However, this is very difficult with computing. So if this is not maintainable, it is very possible for principle 2 to come and say, in circumstances where a person finds it necessary to access original data, which will cause some changes, because we know the moment we touch a computer, we effectively change that evidence. Seizing it after that time, if you just power it on, you change this environment. It's very volatile. So principle 2 say, if that is the case, then to keep the evidence admissible, you need to make sure that the person doing so is competent and be able to give evidence to explain why they have changed the environment. Something like because they had to turn off a computer as part of the evidence acquisition. And principle 3, it focuses on, and this is very related to our talk today, it's very relevant to how audit trails and record of all the processes, they need to be documented. It's a very complex task, and the more complex the cyberspace is, you can imagine how documenting all these incidents, or in fact devices, some devices cannot be seized. Think about data sources coming from the internet and cloud computing. So what do we do in these cases? How can we build an audit trail? There's a very big question mark, and it is an ongoing research area. Then principle 4 is to say that the person in charge of the investigation should clearly have an overall responsibility. So this is about responsibility and accountability. We need it clear so that we avoid errors and we continue to be able to adhere to the expected regulations when it comes to digital investigations. Moving forward to what I would like to call here as the connected supply chain, because the supply chain is not anymore something that is offline. Companies do use technology to have some benefits. The crime and things can go wrong as part of the supply chain. So the crime scene changed a lot. Nowadays it is more complicated, very virtual. It is hard or impossible to seize and look at the diagram I'm sharing with you and think what it means for law enforcement to seize all of that. Of course, when we see a couple of boxes, these can actually be in the hundred thousands. And instead of one car, you can imagine the number. The primary reason behind introducing technological innovations into the supply chain management is to mitigate uncertainty at the end of the day. So there is a value there. And to appreciate why we should expect the supply chain to continue to include IoT devices rather than thinking this is a bad idea, we need to consider that if a larger scale supply chain management is relying on manual data, then the result will be high probability of error, possible delays. I don't think you want to get your Amazon order very late. Absence of data, lack of individual items identification, and the list goes on. Now, to demonstrate an example of what could go wrong considering this complex environment, and I'm going to focus on gaining access attacks to gain access. Otherwise, we do agree that when it comes to an attack, and you keep a methodology in mind, attacks usually start with footprinting and reconnaissance, effectively collecting information about the target. Attack actors would usually move toward the scanning to identify open ports in the network, scanning and enumeration, and then gaining access, maintaining their access after spending a lot of effort. They don't want to be excluded from the network fast, and finally covering their tracks. And what we care about when it comes to digital investigation, we need to know who the actor is. Maybe we want to find some attribution to be in place. We will look at the time they gained access, and also instead of them covering their tracks, we actually want enough evidence, enough data to help us understand what they did. So that's where there will be this conflict, and for us as the defense team, we need to worry about them covering their tracks. The internet and the web is an enabler for supply chain attacks. If you look at here, these examples, starting with the waterhole attack, it works when the attack actor is going to identify a website that's frequently visited by users, maybe from a targeted organization. It might be an entire sector. So the NCSC in the UK, they tell us that these attacks, they could also target a whole sector such as the defense or government or healthcare. The website is then going to be compromised to enable the distribution of malware to users from these sectors. Clearly, the malware here is going to be the file responsible to provide access, usually remote access to the attacker, in what we refer to as remote access Trojan, RAT, enabling the attacker to gain remote access to the target system. Otherwise, if we look at this other example, the third-party software providers, this is when a cyber espionage group, I think one of the good examples mentioned recently, because they have followed, basically, they had a campaign to actually do this, Dragonfly. They Trojanize a legitimate industrial control system software. So instead of a website, they create a Trojan horse by capturing a copy of an industrial control software system software. Then after that, they compromise the website to replace the original software from the software supplier with their own version, which is a Trojan horse. Clearly complicated, and that's why I mentioned an example for who can be behind it. The likes of Dragonfly, they are usually APTs, Advanced Persistent Threat, so they have a lot of resources to make this happen. But this is what we face when we consider the supply chain and critical national infrastructure as well. So this means that when they do such a replacement, they pretty much compromise all those clients for this software provider who would be installing updates or a new version from this supplier. Now, this is very difficult to detect because when the software being altered at source, nobody thought that this actually happened. So think about it. There is no reason for the targeted company to suspect it was not legitimate, of course, unless they perform costly investigations into the matter, and for that, they will require information they can actually trust. It is, however, known that we can hardly trust a compromised digital device. And perhaps it's a good time to mention with you the value of qualifying of those devices that could qualify as digital witnesses. Likewise, the value of another thing we will be discussing in a bit, distributed chain of custody. Let's move, therefore, more to see how all of these can be addressed in a better way after we keep this new concept in mind. The connected supply chain, I've tried to share here an extended example just to elaborate a bit more on the technology expected. And this is only one scenario, of course. You can see a radio frequency identification, RFID. They use electromagnetic fields to identify and track tags attached to objects. They can be anything delivered. So that's one technology to keep in mind. And to enable data sharing, you can expect industrial Internet of Things solutions to be integrated with other enterprise systems. So if you look at how this figure is designed, you can see, for instance, an industrial IoT solution can access the maintenance department's data in order to ensure the state of shipping vehicles is actually appropriate, or maybe to provide an accounting department with real-time data about their assets, something that is required as part of the company's annual report. Annual reports in general, it could be any type of them, but you can see many departments need these data. Now consider the supply chain segments as well. Examples for those can include the supplier side, the goods in transit, inventory at manufacturing, then delivery to customers, and if we ask, what about the individual parameters that can be monitored in this case? And we realize that it includes location, condition of a certain product, the quality of customer service provided, efficiency. So things can vary, but all of this is important data, and they can also all be captured in near real time, I would say, to be very accurate, instead of claiming that in real time is easy to achieve. When it comes to industries, we are not limited to the scenario shared with you, because industries would be benefiting from applying connected supply chain management solution. They include electronics, food, oil and gas, and pretty much everything you can think about. Another pretty much final slide to focus on attacks, because it's very important to mention, is denial of service. With Internet of Things everywhere, those technologies that we have just mentioned, they can be part of a distributed denial of service attack. And because we have so many devices distributed everywhere, we realize that they can generate a lot of traffic. This meant that from as far as 2016, we have witnessed one of the world's largest distributed denial of service attacks, only possible thanks to Internet of Things. With bandwidth, if I recall correctly, well, I definitely know that it was more than 1 terabyte per second of bandwidth easily generated. And Internet of Things is also giving us the following challenge. I recall a conference from which there was a representative coming from the National Grid in the UK. And he mentioned the following example. He said they kept getting a redirection of an attack emerging from a place in the US. They reported that because it was serious, they suspected an APT to be behind it. But the location they identified was empty. It was an empty storage unit. Following further investigation, the U.S. counterparts, they ended up reporting back that, yes, okay, we found the reason. It seems to be the CCTV camera. Yes, so the place is empty, no offices, no computers, but the CCTV was responsible for diverting traffic from elsewhere and then targeting connected devices as part of the national grid in the UK. These are not quite unpredictable things. We need to be quite sensible with it. And that's where an example I always like to mention is, if we look at Windsurf from 1992, from the time we started to see some static web pages, HTML pages, and we were quite happy with the web enabling us to share information easily. Since that time, he went there to a conference wearing, and he's considered one of the fathers of the web. He was wearing a T-shirt, and the title printed on his T-shirt was IP on everything. Because when it comes to technology, the closer you are to it, you can start to have a vision about where things are moving, and you need to be ready for what is coming. And that's another reason today when we try to talk about these concepts such as distributed chain of custody and what a digital witness is, it's because we actually need them yesterday. The human vulnerability in the supply chain is also a reality. We have to keep it in mind. It's not only technology. So when we say the supply chain, we don't discard the human vulnerability. And it exists. It is still, when we refer to phishing attacks, they are very popular with APTs. Even those people who are very resourceful, they rely on the human vulnerability because apparently we cannot fix it. We need a lot of training, and even those who are trained, they might trust the wrong party. They might go through some moral obligations, and some cultures, I mean, if just to mention an example, instead of listing why we have a human vulnerability, I definitely seen cultures where it might not look very nice to look at a VIP guy and ask them for an ID, or to question the people walking with that VIP to bypass some security barriers, including in some sensitive areas. So this happens. In some conclusion, we know that moral obligations, trust, threats to human beings, otherwise ignorance, unfortunately, or insufficient security policies and training, they are all a reason why we continue to have a human vulnerability in the supply chain. Right, so where does that take us? Let's remember that the aim is cyber resilience. And when it comes to the infrastructure, we would like to think that it's not only the complexity of the infrastructure providing a bigger threat landscape and more vulnerabilities, but actually the defense mechanisms are also complex. Defense mechanisms, if you look at this threat model, I took it from one of our recent papers, and it was about connected cars. We start having cars talking to the internet, driving themselves. Okay, what kind of defense mechanism do we have in place? And the short answer is that, okay, we need to profile and detect anomalies. Some of the detection is going to be manual, and we have some advantages to that. Manual detection, static detection is usually fast. So that's nice. They don't take a lot of processing power compared to anomaly detection, because, okay, it's not enough to rely on signatures and some static means. We need to rely on the behavior. Someone is suspicious is not because of who they are, but because of the way they behave, but apply that to devices. But it takes a lot of processing power, and therefore we need a trade-off between static detection and profiling. Apart from that, profiling is very possible. In one project, we had an agreement with a company where we profiled how their employees walk in a building. And in some businesses, they actually need that. Depends on security clearances and what that environment is. But you pretty much want to know how people behave usually. And if you think, oh, the cleaners are spending too much time suddenly in that room next to the servers, then you might want to get an alert. It's about anomalies. It's about unusual behavior that might trigger a question. Otherwise, in another project, we profile the drivers. How many people do you think will drive a car? Can I know who's driving the car without having a camera, just by relying on how they are driving the car? Can I ask the car to identify that person for me? Our findings were that, yes, it's possible. In fact, it was very interesting to see the technology even telling us with a very high probability whether the driver is male or female. Very interesting stuff about genders. But apart from that, think about telling the mindset of that person. Are they sober? Are they otherwise seems to be drinking? Many things can be shared. One last example about profiling and where we are going ahead with it. Some shops are going to use, okay, they don't have permission probably to profile people by looking at their faces and realize, oh, this is a kid or that one is a male or a woman. But what they do in some shops, they are interested to know what their customers are looking for. That's how they can sell more. So they pretty much integrated cameras to look at shoes. So shoes are, well, when you profile it, you can at least tell based on the size and shape of the shoes, to what extent do you think that's a child compared to a man or compared to a woman, so that the places where women spend more time, they simply take the clothes relevant to them and make sure they put it in that corner instead of another corner. It's about building intelligence towards their customers. But you need to think out of the box. If this is possible, then all sort of information can be collected that way. And this is what we deal with. This is how complex the scene is. And that's a lot of opportunities for cyber events and cyber incidents. So that's the point. That's where I want to go with it. It's not only complicated in terms of vulnerabilities, but in terms of capabilities. And we end up dealing with complicated plans as a consequence. Complicated plans, they can have flaws. They are difficult to maintain. Some companies and businesses cannot even afford them. So what do we do? What's the solution? Now, before I say what the solution can be, or at least a proposal towards the solution, let me say that, actually the problem is still bigger than what I have referred to so far, because we have smart cities. They are growing in size. We are moving towards smart city sectors. And this is yet another paper of some work we have been doing, where we surveyed where research was focusing in terms of security for smart city sectors. And so you can see smart healthcare, smart homes, buildings other than homes, and so on. And the cyber resilience techniques seem to include, let me just mention a few examples, adaptive responses. So you need some sort of decision making to automate and optimize the ability to respond in a timely and appropriate manner. Monitoring, it needs to be analytical. So we need to process a lot of big data to monitor, to facilitate monitoring, and that's very complex. Coordinated protection. It's not about saying we have a computer and we install a firewall and intrusion detection system. Actually, it's about a whole. We say it's a layered security. It's a defense in-depth strategy, so that adversaries have to overcome multiple obstacles before they reach where they want to go. But also deception. An APT is happening, they are conducting attacks against a smart city. How can you mislead them? How can you confuse them? Because those are resourceful parties, and they will continue until they reach their targets. So part of what you do, you put a lot of deceptions in front of them to waste their time, to delay them, and so on. And those are very few examples. I mean, just a few more. If I mentioned them, I probably need to refer to redundancy. If something goes wrong, what do I have as a replacement? Privilege restriction. If something goes in the hands of an attacker, how can I make sure they don't gain access everywhere, so to prevent privilege escalation, so privilege restriction. So that then shows that the threat landscape is actually huge. Where do we go from there? We also looked at part of how the solutions started to work, and I realized that a lot of threshold readings and analysis is taking place. And when it comes to threat detection and prediction, we need to be proactive, and these decisions are being made as part of some cognitive abilities. Some AI tools are being utilized. And it's being very successful. I don't want to name companies, but some of the very successful products, I would say, in the market for companies moving from a startup to being a unicorn. Unicorn is a company when their market value is over $1 billion. This is happening in cybersecurity when the solution is powered by AI, and it can not focus on individual products, but it's about what is a healthy environment, and let me know if something goes as an anomaly in part of the company or everything related to the processes within a company. If you can do that, well, you can get much more than nowadays that 1 billion of market share. But anyhow, this is the future. This is what we look at, and this is what we need to deal with. But what is our problem then? We keep losing a lot of data if we keep doing things manually. We simply cannot afford to do our investigations with limited information and relying a lot on human beings to do everything. By everything, I mean all the different phases of the digital investigation model. The concept of digital witnesses, I would define them to say it's going to be a device that is able to collaborate in the management of electronic evidence from both technological and legal standpoints. In a criminal and civil law, the term chain of custody, which we need to use it as an enabling technology, and in this case we want to make it distributed as well, it refers to the order in which items of evidence will be handled during the investigation of a case. Proving that this item have been properly handled through an unbroken chain of custody. And this usually is done by even using a paperwork approach. But a digital chain of custody will replace that paper-based approach to describe electronic means of documentation, and that will make things faster. Still not enough. A distributed chain of custody nowadays is facilitated by yet another enabling technology. More precisely, I would refer to distributed ledger technologies. In the business, this is known as blockchain as well. Now, the chain of custody records in this case will be distributed to a decentralized computing system, incorporating multiple sources or nodes to store and retrieve these records, making it very difficult for someone to delete or alter or get rid of. Having the blockchain saves the integrity. And the transactions in this case will be the process of adding a new chain of custody record, amending it, adding a new transaction to the distributed interlinked ledger means that copies of this new record will be synchronized with the whole network. So instead of basically making sure that Bitcoin continues to work, maybe we want to have a proper chain of custody maintained this way. But is that the only problem we need to solve with a chain of custody? That's actually not where we stop. I'm talking about automation, a lot of automation, because we want to reduce this role of the single human being. So digital witnesses, when we look at them, let me just say that if we look at the requirements to enable them, we keep in mind that with the technical requirements in mind, we say that a new technology needs to capture evidence. We need to address questions such as where will the data be saved, how will the data be managed, and also the traceability. Legal requirements, it will probably be stakeholders' consent, because if we say IoT, Okay, what if personal devices are part of this IoT network? Do we have permission to collect such evidence or not? Now, let's have some examples with references, and you are welcome to read more about it. I try to include these references here with the DOI for you to get them from our papers as well. But basically, the idea is double entry system originated from bookkeeping, and we need it here as well, but in a distributed nature with the help of a blockchain. The idea, and let me refer to them here, is to say, a digital witness is either one device or a collection of devices. If it's a car moving in the street, and an incident takes place, the witnesses will be the traffic light system, if it is in the nearby, any other sensors as part of a smart road, and other cars in the around that area. And not only, you don't treat a car as one sensor, but actually cars are multiple sensors. So if the speed changes, you have some information to monitor. If there are cameras in the cars, you can use them, and that's very nice and useful. GPS data, but overall, all these devices will tell you some intelligence. But we don't want to rely and trust this information directly because it can be faked. The idea of the digital witness is that you use PKI infrastructure with private keys to identify them well. You cannot keep this data because it's a large amount of data. So when you use these sensors as witnesses, you need to push the data somewhere. The solution for it is the cloud. So cloud computing can receive all this data waiting for you to need to use them. And for you to know that this information is usable because it's just in the cloud, how can you tell that it is actually as it is from the moment it was extracted from the incident scene? You go back and check the interconnected distributed chain of custody, which is saved as blocks of hashes in the blockchain. So PKI infrastructure, you have IoT devices, doesn't matter whether they are sensors or big devices, collaboratively. You have the cloud, and you have what you need to analyze, but this time you can trust it. To make things a bit clearer, I try to kind of zoom at the role of this enabling technology, in this case, the blockchain. Keep in mind these digital investigation models. So there is a physical context, logical and legal context. Logical is when the investigators spend the time to analyze, and we want to make their life easier here. Maybe in the future, and I probably can see this happening, the more cognitive and smart decisions that can be taken by AI, they will probably help here. But at the moment, even without AI, what we can do, we can identify and preserve data from potential witnesses for incidents before the incident happened. So in real time, all of this will be maintained. It's similar to having a CCTV all the time, but this will include all the devices of interest. So they are pre-identified, and there will be a mechanism to make sure identification and preservation happens. That cuts then all this time for investigators, and it establishes the chain of custody. When an investigation happens in response to a problem, it continues without losing that opportunity for intelligence. Zooming yet somewhere else to make sure that we look at the data lifecycle. Data are created at this point, and this is where they are destroyed. Now, assuming that we are not looking at anything destroyed because it's useful data that we are referring to here, the idea is that the moment valuable data is created and stored, it will immediately be pushed to be stored forever in the cloud. Alone is not enough. You need to combine it with how you maintain its integrity, the hashes, and that's in the blockchain. Two different systems, but together you can trust their source. Now, digital witnesses are not going to be stored individually in the cloud for each incident they monitor. It is worth saying that the more in-depth you read about the concept and the topic that is emerging, we can also have hearsay digital witnesses in the cloud. And that is when a device gets information from another device, it's passed to it, and you can also rely on that because the story is established in the blockchain. Similar to you witnessing an incident and you tell your friend about it, your friend is going to be the hearsay for that particular device. Almost towards the end, I'm a bit conscious of the time. For questions, I will just conclude with a practical example. And also, if you want to read more about it, please go ahead with the link. And here we were trying to help protecting people. So because examples can vary, and I don't want to make it sound we are only interested in connected cars and the supply chain in a very technical means, but actually us as human beings, we can make use of that. In this example, we are trying to look at, and this is part of a multidisciplinary project, it's about people with chronic diseases and disabilities. They have been victimized, including online. So using technology to have bad impact on people. Our findings, our colleagues from public health and psychology, they tell us that people who are vulnerable, they need to maintain strict programs to keep themselves stable. Otherwise, if you hit them with bullying, with harassment, with cyber stalking, they lose that component, and we have evidence to say they will not be stable anymore. Now, how can we make sure when somebody is reporting something like this, technology will be on our side, where we can convince the police and we can convince the system in place so that a hospital will provide more support, a place, and in this case, we applied the project in a school where people have these problems while they are in an institution. They can send people to directly stop an incident in near real time, so that the support can reach that level. And if it is about utilizing the legal system, the IoT devices, and in some cases with some people with disabilities, they have sensors in their in a vehicle they are using, or any sensors on their bodies. All of these, using digital witnessing approach, will be on their side to tell a court of law what happened, even if no one else is looking at those incidents. And the idea is therefore, this is where you can see the digital, the blockchain or distributed ledger. That's where you can see the cloud taking part. And this is one application for it that can be extended. This is pretty much an introduction for the concept. I would like to thank you for listening to this talk. We still have things to do, but the technology is actually there. It's about testing, it's about regulating this environment, and we know that each of the enabling technologies are growing as well, including distributed ledger technologies and AI to add some more cognitive abilities. So I believe that the concept of digital witnesses has evolved rapidly. It's an area of interest for me as a guy interested in digital forensics. It forms an inevitable requirement for the supply chain and beyond. By that, I would like to also remind you to include personal devices. As briefly discussed, one example was to support vulnerable groups against physical abuse. I'm open, I think, for questions if there are any. Otherwise, I do have open questions just to share with you to think about.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much for that, Haider. Very, very insightful and very detailed. We'll go to the questions because time is ticking away. So the first question I have here is from Chris, and the question is there a possibility that the use of digital witnesses is going to be perceived as being anti-privacy? How do you balance the two needs?
Yes. I think when it comes to technology, one approach to keep in mind is referred to as a privacy-preserving approach, or privacy-enabling technology, PETs. And they go alongside what we usually do. This is similar. It's not different from there. So for instance, the government at the moment, they are thinking, if we do deep packet inspection on traffic, how can we make sure we know when there will be, for instance, child pornography? We want to detect that, but we don't want to see anything else to preserve the privacy of people. So compliance, but with privacy preserving approaches. And it's a challenge, it's a research area. What I can say is that it's extremely important that we balance them out so that the benefit will be more than a harm against people's privacy. And situations can be different. If somebody is being targeted, so another example to kind of show how this can be useful. If I believe that I don't want devices to monitor me all the time, maybe I'm comfortable. But if I'm being targeted, it will be nice to have the choice to say, I would like those sensors to start evidencing what happens to me. And then there will be a compromise, but maybe because I feel there is risk. During COVID, we have been talking to law enforcement from a research point of view, thinking about domestic abuse. Very difficult to put cameras at home, but if somebody is at risk and they would like to have sensors to witness something that could happen to them, that might be one way to have a solution. But I completely agree that privacy needs to be addressed very carefully.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think it's always been an issue when it comes to sort of technology, with where we have to give a lot of your data and then being interrogated. So yeah, privacy is definitely very high on the agenda, I think, in general. A question from Michael Strater. He says, the slides you showed earlier on seem to be saying you'll do a psychological profile of all the staff in the infrastructure. Do you cover all personnel, and how do you actually do it? And at what level do you do this?
I think I know the slides you've been referring to. So that one, I think I referred to one of the projects to mention the capabilities. For that project, it was a very special case where people signed to say, as part of their work, this environment will be monitored. So it's not something normal for businesses. I don't expect us to be working in an environment where everything we do is completely tracked. But what my point was from that slide is the possibilities of technology that we need to be worried about. Because if that possibility is there, even if you protect or even if you control it with the regulation, the problem is if an attack happens and they gain access to this technology, they will be able to do it without your permission and without you knowing about it. So that was referring to how complex the situation is. Now, the part that we think about when it comes to digital witnesses is, if that happens, at least let us know how exactly it took place with data we can trust. So I'm not promoting the idea of monitoring everyone, but I'm saying if somebody is making bad use of this technology, we need to make sure we know what happened and have it documented somewhere. We analyze data we can trust. That's the idea of the digital witness, rather than it's not the surveillance, it's not the monitoring of you, it's the monitoring of other devices, so that we are actually aware, and hopefully it has that benefit, which can eventually, in fact, support privacy.
Right. I hope that answered the question there for you, Michael. Another one here from myself. What industries can benefit the most and the quickest from the adoption of these profile techniques? And who should be the first movers here, you think?
Sorry, profiling or digital witnesses?
Digital witnesses.
Digital witnesses.
Yeah.
Basically, I think all businesses who have, what we say is that any business, the moment they form the business, they need an incident response plan. A big business, chances are they have it in-house. Rather than a simple plan, they have more capabilities. The more complex the infrastructure is, there is a requirement for automation. Everything I was talking about today is actually about automation and preparing the scene for more cognitive abilities with AI. Therefore, as long as you have a complex network somewhere and you spend a lot of money, to make sure you can handle it somehow with many manual processes, you will save money and have data you can trust. And in fact, it's the only way to cope with the complexity of the scene, is to automate and to have data you can trust by capturing it before incidents happen, by connecting them to blockchain, by identifying which devices need to be monitored and for how long. It's simply similar to CCTV for small devices and sensors and everything. So I would say it's not the type of the business, it's the complexity of the network.
Thank you. Last question. Where next for your research, and how do you see it changing over the next 5 years? Will AI take over the field completely?
I think AI is here to expand more, and we need more control, both technical and regulations, more regulations to know how to deal with them. GDPR was one step in the right direction. So I think in the next couple of years, we will see more settlement around that. To clarify myself with an example, you go to a bank and you apply for a credit card, you get rejected. With GDPR, you can challenge the bank to say, look, if an algorithm decided that I don't get it, I want a human being to look at that and explain it for me, or at least just to look at it because there might be an error. So therefore, this is where we are heading with regulations. And the technical part that I can add is the special type of AI that we can explain. So not AI as a black box, but AI, especially for cybersecurity, that we can explain, explainable AI, where we understand how the decisions are happening. Of course, this will take more than 5 years, but research has started focusing on this already, and it will continue for 5 years and beyond.
Brilliant. I think that's just right on cue. Thank you very much, Haider, for your time and presentation. It's been very, very interesting and thought-provoking. Just to say to our viewers and listeners, thank you very much for your time as well. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. However, again, I'll urge you, if you haven't, please click on the like button and also subscribe, and you will get more information regarding our future talks and presentations. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Good night.